What's up, YouTube? As a bunch of my subscribers already know over on Patreon, I released a Baldric pattern a couple weeks ago. You can obviously find that pattern on Patreon or on my website or my Etsy shop. Links in the description down below. I'll put some links up here as well. It'll be right there. And yeah, so this is the video for that thing. Let's do it. Let's do it. This video is brought to you by LONSDALE Leather. Make sure you check out the description for links to their website where you can find all sorts of tools, leather, and supplies. So, grab a sharp knife, start cutting things out. There's a couple pieces that you have to tape together, this being one of them. This is the main, sword hanger part of the Baldric. So just tape it all together, cut it out, and then punch all your holes. And then, obviously, you just do this for everything else. Do it for these parts, do it for these parts, then you've got all these parts. I'm using some 5-ounce oil tan for this project. That is the very thinnest I would want to go. I'd probably prefer to go a little heavier, but you could get away with the 5-ounce. So I trace everything on with the awl. I mark the holes with the Sharpie. I could mark them with the awl, but the Sharpie just makes the center point a lot easier to spot. And then you just get a sharp knife and cut it out. I don't care what kind of knife you use, just pick up a sharp knife, make sure it's sharp. And then you just do the same thing to everything else. Cut it all out. Use your best judgment on how to do that. All the straight pieces, well, almost all the straight pieces, have been measured off of rulers that I own. So they are 1.5 inch, 2 inches, etc. And I can just throw the ruler down and cut a strip. Now, you could use a strap cutter. That would be the smart thing to do, but my blade was pretty dull. Here I'm showing that you can do an oblong punch just by punching 2 holes and cutting it out with the knife. But then, eventually, I go back to my actual oblongs because I have them and I will use them. There you go. So yeah, trace everything out. Trace everything out. I've got a 20.5 inch mark on here because I've measured this to myself. So one of these is a 20.5, and I think the other one is a 31.5. I can hear what you're saying.
But Magnus, why did you have us tape it together?
Well, that's because it'll be easier to keep everything in one spot. You don't get confused at which pattern ends go where. Both ends of this pattern are properly measured. All you're doing is expanding the middle of it, where there's the gray stripes that I've put in. Now just cut everything out. Punch all your holes. Cut all your corners. Make sure everything is cut out just like the pattern says to cut it out. It's all the same stuff. It's all straight lines and hole punches and curves. There you go. 34.5 for this piece is what it needs to be. Measured off of me. I'm 6'4", so you're going to have to play around a little bit, but you get a general idea of what's a good starting point. Now, when I first started this project, I thought to myself, great, I don't have to bevel it. I'm using a nice, soft oil tan. It'll be fine. But in the end, I decided that it would just be a better video if I beveled it and burnished all the edges. So I'm going to do a really thin bevel, really narrow, really small. Small. Let's go with small. I'm going to do a very small bevel on the front and back of all the pieces, and then I'm going to dye them and burnish them up with some toconol. Now, I do recommend this on generally all your projects if you can do it, but you could, if you were feeling lazy, get away with a very basic Baldric with no beveling, no dyeing, and no burnishing. Speaking of things that you could do without, well, you don't need to carve this piece, or you don't even have to put this piece on for this Baldric to be functional, but I enjoy doing leather carving and coming up with designs, and so I'm doing it. Now, if I had decided to be lazy and not bevel the oil tan, I still would have beveled the Vegetan, because it just wouldn't look the same. The oil tan, you can get away with it. The Vegetan, you really want to bevel it and burnish all your edges. All my hole punches for these rivets have been 1/8 inch so far with these drive punches. The holes on the tongue of the buckle are larger, but that's totally based on what buckle you decide to use, so choose accordingly.
Whoa, what? How?
I'm a bit of a wizard.
Sorry, I won't be able to help you all with that technique. It's specific to the arcane arts.
Time for some leather carving. If you guys have watched videos of mine before, leather carving is generally all the same on every video. I'm going to try and make this short. For you people that want to see it through and through, I've got tons of videos on leather carving. But the basics are Vegetan leather. You wet the leather. You use tracing film and a stylus to imprint your design lightly onto that wet leather. You don't carve it while it's soggy, you let it dry a bit. You cut your lines with a swivel knife, and then once you're done with all your swivel knife lines, you use a beveler and backgrounding tools to help make those carvings stand out. So we're beveling all the over-unders on all these knots because we want it to look like those knots are going over and under and around all those parts. And then I am choosing, this is an option, to background the interior. The other option would be to just bevel everything. Bevel the sides of every line, bevel the over-under of every line. But I wanted it to look a little different, so I'm backgrounding the interior, but still beveling in the spots that need to be beveled. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit and use a stylus, a scoop stylus, to bevel just around the outside edge very lightly. I don't know how many people do this, but I do it. It saves some time, and it just gives you a light bevel instead of like a crazy deep crease with your beveler. And it's usually nice and smooth too. So it saves time, it's nice and smooth, and the bevel's pretty light. But on all your corners, you're going to have to still tap those out or it's going to look really weird.
Abracadabra, one might say.
I'm using Phoebing's dark brown pro dye on these edges. You can use whatever you want. Well, it should be dye, but there's lots of options. Feel free to play around. You can use Tokonole for your edges, beeswax, an edge coat paint. Really depends on what kind of finish you want. Just make sure they're properly done because you don't want any rub-off excess on your clothes or on a customer's clothes. That's never good. I'm going to try and make sure that in all my videos I show you the basic tools before moving on to advanced tools. So I showed you the basic hand burnisher earlier, one of many, and now here is my burnishing wheel that's set up on my grinder at the shop. This makes quick work of edges. Super handy tool. So there, you've burnished everything. Now let's buff the tops, make sure there's no weird marks on anything, clean them all up, and put them aside to be ready for final assembly. Now, painting with dyes isn't absolutely mandatory, but it certainly will make your leather carving pop, and if you put all this time into carving your piece, you may want to make it look as good as possible. When painting with dyes, you want to load your brush with dye, and then kind of get rid of a little bit of it, because you almost always have too much dye on your brush. And if you touch that brush down on your project, load it up, it's going to hit the leather and just run in every direction and soak into spots that you really didn't want it to be. Something that you can do to both help your dye not run and get a more even coat is to put a light coat of oil on the project first. This will act as a slight resist, stopping the dye from racing off in every direction on you, as well as help even out your colors. Fair warning, I haven't played with that a ton. Probably experiment first before doing it on something important. Magic is amazing. Now we're just giving the pieces a buff, putting Tokonole on the edge, and burnishing the edges. Here's that hand burnishing tool again. Pretty inexpensive and easy to use, so pick yourself up one. Now I'm going to apply a resist to my project with this neutral Resolene and a spray gun. This will stop this gel that I'm going to use from penetrating and staining everything. All I want the gel to do is get into all the cracks. It'll blend everything nicely together. You wipe away the excess. I put way too much gel on here, but whatever. And you'll see what the end result is. It just gives it a nice finished look. And any problem areas when you were painting with dyes that may look a little odd, they get blended away. Yeah, it looks pretty nice, I think. After you've done both pieces, hit them with another coat of resist. You want to seal everything in. You can call it a finish, you can call it a resist, whatever. You buff them both up, and then we're on to sewing keepers. I sew my keepers inside out, and then I turn them so that the right side is facing out, and the stitches look nice and everything works out pretty good. Now it's time for final assembly. Follow along, throw a bunch of rivets into all the holes that you've punched already, put some caps on them, and set them in place. This fold of the baldric right here can be adjusted depending on the sword or the scabbard size. You could cinch this right down and friction fit it onto a scabbard permanently if you wanted to. You could also add some lace or buckles in order to put it temporarily onto various scabbards, which would work out great, and I'll probably add a little pattern for that later. Yeah, now it's just more of the same, going through the process and making sure you get all your rivets set. Make sure you put the strap in between these two pieces before riveting it down. It'll be easier to slide it through once it's already in than to try and force it in to begin with. Cut it out, rivet it together, put a sword in it, done. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and obviously hit the notification button so you don't miss any of my content. That's incredibly important. Oh yeah, and until next time, keep on being creative in whatever it is you do.